topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
I got the eye of the tiger, the fighter, dancing through the fire, 'cause I am the champion, and you're gonna hear me roar louder, louder than a lion, 'cause I am the champion, and you're gonna hear me roar.
Hello, and welcome to the Success for Women show, where you can view us on Talk for TV and listen to us on the Women for Women Network. I am Dr. Madeline Ann Lewis, your host, and my mission is to help women accelerate the path to success. Well, today's topic, I'm very excited. The topic is the first, the few, and the only. And my guest is Deepa Purushothaman. And let me just give you a little bit of background about her. I mean, very fascinating stuff. Deepa is a former senior executive and a corporate inclusion visionary. She challenges and redefines the status quo of leadership, success, and power by centering the needs and experiences of women of color. As a senior partner at Deloitte, Deepa spent more than 20 years helping clients transform and grow. She also focused on women's leadership and inclusion strategies as the managing partner of WIN, Deloitte's pioneering, global renowned women's initiative, and the first Indian American woman and one of the youngest people to make partner in the firm's history. She is the author of The First, The Few, and the Only: How Women of Color Can Redefine Power in Corporate America. And she is a TED and South by Southwest speaker. So I'd like to welcome my guest, Miss Deepa Purushothaman. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Purushothaman, close, yes. Purushothaman, yes. Thank you for having me.
Oh, wow. It's great to have you here. I tell you what, I always give them the standard bio of my guests, but I always ask the first question is, for you, what do you want us to know about Deepa? Tell us what you want us to know about you.
Yeah, so I think you covered some of it. Maybe I'll do it in my own words or in a slightly different way just for context setting. So I spent 21 years at Deloitte and left right in the early stages of COVID. So I left right before we called it the Great Resignation. And I think it's important just because I left a job when, people were not leaving jobs and I was told I was doing all the wrong things. And I was in a very senior role with a lot of security and I was doing all the wrong things to leave. But I left and 6 weeks later, sold this book and started a company that is also focused on women of color with my co-founder, Ra. And so everything I do now is at least right now in this moment, is focused on helping women of color rise and really thrive. I think there's a lot of surviving that we're talking about, but how do we move from surviving to thriving in workplaces? And so just a little bit of context. So I'm a recent, Ra calls me a refugee from corporate, but I'm a recent, leaver of the corporate space. So just important context.
Wow. Very interesting. That's why I wanted to have you on the show just to share some success nuggets with the women out there. And so now you write about that the structure of corporate America was not built for us or by us. Tell us, what does that mean for women of color trying to navigate their careers?
Yeah, there's so many messages. So I should also say I interviewed 500 women of color in writing the book. And obviously, as we've launched our company, there's been many more. So we're probably at a few thousand, but there's 500 women of color's research and stories in writing the book. And so when I when I talk about it, I just, the volume is pretty significant. I think so many of the women of color I interviewed and I meet are taught, you have to work harder, right? You have to do more work, 2 or 4 times as hard. So almost all the women of color are told 2. Some of the Black women are told 4, right? There is some difference there in that sort of message, but it's this work harder idea. And part of what I wanted to unpack is you can work as hard as you want, but there's still other things that are going to show up in the system that I think most of us have never really talked about. It's at least in workplaces. And so I feel pretty strongly, and this I found in the 500 women of color, most of us were not really taught or really talked about racism at work. We talked about racism, and especially the Black women I interviewed talked about racism, but there wasn't really a lot of unpacking about how it showed up at work. I do think that that's more of a recent sort of conversation in the last few years since George Floyd's murder that we're having. How does that show up, especially in corporate spaces? And why, I use that statement that you read out loud is because I think a lot of us have been taught wrongly, right? That the workplace is a meritocracy. And so if you work harder, it'll be okay. Just keep your head down. And part of what I'm trying to unpack is that's not true. And if we do that, it makes women of color work harder and we suffer, right? The trauma, the stress, the physical fatigue, which I know we'll get to. And that's what I was really trying to show. And maybe, a great way of illustrating this is early on, the first story I tell in the book is I sat down with Renee Myers, and she's the VP of Inclusion at Netflix. And she's a good friend. And we sat down to talk about inclusion. I thought she would talk about, general principles of inclusion. And instead, she started talking about a plane. She said when she was younger, when her kids were younger, really little, when she would get on an airplane, she would really struggle because when she put the luggage overhead, she would worry it was going to fall on her children's head, right? And as a mom, she just couldn't understand, why is the airplane designed with the luggage going overhead if there's turbulence? And I jumped in because as a partner, I used to travel sometimes 3 cities a week. And so 6 times a week, I was putting my suitcase up and taking my suitcase down. And I'm 5'1". And so I'm little, right? The process of getting that suitcase up, if I've packed a lot, is hard. And I was sharing with her that it's so fascinating. She was telling me the story about being a mom, and I'm sharing, the height challenge, of putting the suitcase up. And it's a small space. And so the story is really trying to illustrate that in a small space, it's designed differently, shows up differently for different people. Like a man who's 5'10" and taller may not even be thinking about those things. But in that moment where I'm trying to put my luggage up, I'm thinking, why did I pack so much? Why did I do so much? Why did I wear these heels? Like, why am I so short? What's wrong with me? And I think that's the same message that most of us carry to the workplace, that we have to do more. There's something wrong with us. And what I wanted to really unpack is there's something structurally, there's something message-wise that is happening around us. So that, yes, we take responsibility for working harder in places where we need to work harder, but we don't just universally take that message, that the airplane, the structure, the context, the environment is also important to look at. So I like that story because it helps people who don't understand. I'm sure most of your listeners do get it, as soon as I say that. But for those that don't, it helps people understand, like, structures and spaces, environments show up differently for different people, as does work.
Wow. So how did you, or how did being first shape your own workplace experience?
Yeah, I think for me, it was, just growing up in America. I'm Indian American. My parents emigrated here in the late 60s. And I grew up in a very small white town in New Jersey, and in a farm country town. So I was one of 5 students of color at school. We didn't talk about race at home, so I didn't really have language for it. I always thought there was something different about me, and I never saw myself. And I think this is true of a lot of people, but I think especially when you're the children of immigrants, or especially being Indian, my own background, I didn't see myself on television or in the media. I didn't see myself in my teachers. I didn't see myself anywhere represented around me. And my parents didn't have a lot. Now New Jersey is much more, there's a lot more Indians, but when I grew up there wasn't. And so we didn't even have that sense of community. So I think I grew up without seeing leaders who look like me, without even knowing what I could be, without seeing myself represented. And that message really kind of came with me to the workplace. So consciously and unconsciously, I would often question, do I belong here? I don't see myself represented in the leaders that are ahead of me. They don't look like me. So how do I adjust? How do I fit in? What does that look like? So for me, that was a lot of the question. I did not face a lot of challenges around race and gender in specific. I faced more challenges because I was young. And so I was often, I'd be in the room and people would say to me, where's the leader? Where's the partner? Where's the person in charge? Almost 5 or 6 times on a daily basis. Because I made partner in my early 30s. And so that was a really big struggle for me. So it was more of a confidence, which I think, by the way, happens to a lot of women of color. I now have the research and the language for that. But at the time, I thought that was unique to what I look like or my age. And I think it's more of what we think of as a leader. That was the disconnect that happened for me.
Wow. Getting into that, high level like that at that age, that was something in itself. I mean, because, a lot of women, like you said, and you mentioned confidence, and that's one of the things that I talk about all the time is that one of the things you really have to have is confidence, because if you don't have the confidence, you're never going to be able to step out there and do some of the things that you are qualified to do. And that, I think, is what happened a lot of times to women. They tend to hold themselves back and, shrink back because of that confidence thing. They just don't have it sometimes and don't know really how to even get it, because, you don't get a lot of people giving them that encouragement. You can do this. You can manage that whole entire department, and so that confidence part is really key to getting into those upper level positions. I really think it is, especially as an executive, getting to that level.
I would add, I talk about it in the book and in my work is imposter syndrome, right? It's that confidence and imposter syndrome related topics, right? Not the same thing, but related topics. I think, again, for me, it comes back to the messages that we get growing up and the system around us, right? There's a line where I say we teach little white boys, right? They're going to be leaders. And what do we teach, little black and brown girls? We don't teach them the same things. And so you have to do a lot of reprogramming, right? On your own, to your point. And that's where the confidence comes from. If you've never been told you can be more or you can be that, it's hard to know that you can. And so I think, a lot of the time we blame, women for their imposter syndrome. And I think so much of it is the brainwashing and the messages that we get as well. And that's where the system and the structure, and again, that environment, that container also matters for us. And so that's really what I'm trying to draw attention to.
Absolutely. So how can we begin to reframe the fit in and the lean in mentalities that have left women feeling burnt out or isolated in the workplace?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to that first question around, or the first line around working harder. Again, we tell women of color and women, and we tell women, like, you need to work harder to kind of get the same opportunity to show up, to get attention. And that's that lean in message, right? Like, do more, show up bigger, take up more space. But I think what we don't unpack is for women of color, and especially for Black women, but for women of color, sometimes that attention can come with a lot of negativity, right? Sometimes too much ambition or too much assertion can be a bad thing. The research proves that, right? And so really understanding that in some context, how we show up, how we lean in looks different for us. And just leaning in isn't going to be enough. And that's part of what we need to understand. Right. But I also think there's a lot of struggle. So I interviewed pretty senior women in writing the book. And one of the things they would say to me is, I sit in a seat of power, but I don't feel powerful. And so part of what I'm also trying to make sure we start to talk about is that most of us have been taught to conform in order to kind of get to a seat of leadership, right? To be a first viewer only, you're going to have to let go of all of these things that are important to who you are to rise. And that leadership looks like a lot of the white men that have come before us. And it's assertive and it's masculine. It's all these kind of very boxed in, very predefined criteria. And I think for a lot of the women of color I work with, they have other criteria they bring to the table. They have other ways of being that are so true to who they are. And that's the challenge. How do we bring enough of that? So your secret sauce, who you are, like what makes you you, is also accepted and has space in the workplace. And that's not just leaning in, that's also changing the culture around you so that more of that is accepted.
Absolutely. And because that's one of the things that I've noticed too, that a lot of times when women get into these upper level positions, they feel like they have to take on the traits of their male counterparts, And another thing, and maybe you could speak to this too, a lot of times they will not help pull other women up with them because they feel like it will look too much like favoritism.
Yes.
That's something that you
Yeah.
encountered during your interviews, or did they talk about
Yeah.
that as to why they might feel they shouldn't pull too many women up, up that ladder?
Yeah. So many things, ways we could go in that question. So the first one is, and we should also say, like, well, you and I could probably talk for 5 hours, so we're going to try and get to a lot of things. But on the first question, yes, like what I found is the more senior you were, and we don't often talk about this, there's actually more pressure to conform. More pressure to behave. I call it towing the line in the book. And so that is absolutely true. And I found that in the research over and over again, because it's almost like you've given up so much to get to the seat. Then why are you stepping out? Why are you acting different? Like you're here now, like you're one of us. And so that is absolutely true. Yes, I did find. So I found two really surprising things to me in the research. One was almost all of the women that I met were sick, and we can come back to that. So 2 out of 3 women were sick. Physically sick. So not just, mentally exhausted, which I think we're talking about now, but literally physical manifestations of being sick. And the second most surprising thing is I would end my hour or 2-hour long interviews and I'd say, is there anything else you want to share? And almost universally, the women would look down, they would look at their feet, or they would, not make eye contact because there was shame in saying this out loud. But can you, Deepa, talk about how we don't help each other as women? That white women have been the most difficult for us as women of color, but even as women of color, Indian women don't always help Black women. And even as Black women, we don't help each other because we believe there's one seat, right? We believe, if you and I are in a room, we don't know each other, or we're up for a promotion or something, we're going to end up thinking only one of us can get it because, we've been told, quote unquote, only one seat for a woman of color. So I think there is that. I think for some women, not a lot, but there is a little bit of, once I get to the seat, I don't want to be seen as a woman of color. So I'm not going to necessarily bring other women of color with me, right? Because I've gotten there, I have to prove myself. There's actually research that suggests, and it's called the Queen Bee research. It's not my own research, but it's research that suggests some of that comes from, we try to conform. We try and behave like those around us. We're actually rewarded for being more like the white men around us than we are for being that woman of color and having difference and bringing more of us to the table. And that is what we need to change. So that's really also what the book is about, that we need to stop doing that. And that if we're going to change systems around us, you and I can't do that by ourselves. We need to do that together and find community to do that. So.
Wow. And that's exactly what I talk about when I did my TEDx talk. The topic was show up to rise up.
Yes.
And what you just talked about is basically what I had in that talk, because it's like, we have to show up to rise up, and we have to help each other up.
Yes.
No matter, how you feel about a person. And this is one thing that I always say, men may not like each other, but if it comes to being able to promote another man, they will do it. A woman, not so much. She will not. If I don't like you, I don't like her. I'm not gonna help her. I'm not gonna promote her. And that's so unfortunate that that happens. And that's one of the mindsets, especially when clients come to me, that I try to help them not focus on that, not focus on the fact that if I help another woman up, it's going to look like favoritism, not focus on the fact that I have to act like a man just to get up that ladder, to not focus on these things, because that's just not, to me, that's not going to, once they get there, it's going to be really, it's also, they say it's lonely at the top anyway, but if you don't have someone there that you feel got your back, that looks like you or what have you, it's definitely going to be lonely at the top.
Absolutely. That's what the book is about. So I call it The First, the Few, the Only, because most of these women were the first, whether it was in their family to go to college, or the first in a company or a department, one of the few in a department, the only at a senior level. That's what I found. Like a lot of this, I did not set out thinking I was going to write a book. I left my corporate job without that clarity. But this came about because I started meeting with women of color, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And at one point, my now business partner, Ron, I ended up doing about a dozen dinners across the country with 20 or 30 women of color each. We were just networking. We were just trying to she was trying to help me figure out, what am I going to do next? And what we ended up finding is there were so many universal stories across industries, across, age groups. These were, again, all senior women, and they were finishing each other's stories and finishing each other's sentences. But what also came up for a lot of the women is they were so busy rising in these very intense jobs that they didn't have those networks. They didn't have those friends groups outside of work. I'm not saying that's true for everybody. It was true for almost 85, 90%.
Yes.
And so to your point, it's not only lonely, but they're even more lonely because there's nowhere they can go and to say, like, this just happened. What should I say? Or this person was just racist to me. Like, how do I answer that? They don't have that place. And that was really surprising to me, but it also makes sense. Like, I was so busy working, I didn't have time for it to cultivate those relationships outside of work myself. So it makes sense, but you think it's just you sometimes when you're in those situations.
Absolutely. But when you do the research, like when I did my research, it was the same thing. And that's why I emphasize the three things that I emphasize in my program is that you have to be confident, you have to be assertive, and you have to build a support network. Those things are really important. And I mean, I just can't stress that enough as far as women, especially wanting to move into those upper echelon positions. So tell me, what is your main advice to women who are the first, the few, and the only?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just covered it. One is you have to do the work on yourself, right? To figure out what's important to you and how do you want to show up. And that goes back to those messages because there isn't always space for a lot of who we are in these traditional workplaces. So you have to figure out for yourself, like, who are you? What's important to you? How do you want to lead? And for the women I work with, it's not like 100 criteria or 100 things that, really define them. It's usually like less than 12 or, maybe even half a dozen. And once you know what those things are, don't compromise on those things. So I call that the power of me, like figuring out for yourself, what are your boundaries? What are your standards? What's your leadership style? What's your confidence even, right? Like, who are you? But then once you have that, I say you need to find the power of we. You need to find community because the only way you're going to survive and thrive, right? Address even the sickness criteria that I talked about before. Again, all these women are sick. The only way you're going to get better is if you talk about the challenges, you talk about the pains, and you have that community. In some ways, I don't have this in the book, but now in hindsight, I think what I was trying to really give voice to is the shadow side of trailblazing, right? The shadow side of being an only in these spaces.
Right.
We often look at the women, we're like, she's so amazing, or congratulations, or great that you did that. But there's something implicit that we don't acknowledge. Like, she's had to sacrifice so much to get to that seat. She's had to behave in certain ways. And what impact has that had on her? And how do we really start to talk about that? Because I don't want to continue to reward the one-offs, because I think what we're rewarding when we reward the one-offs, we're rewarding people who've kind of made it by. We need to actually talk about what makes it so hard for there to be many. Like, so how do we move from the first few, the only, to the many is really the important conversation.
Exactly. And it's amazing because when I was in the military and in corporate America, as I was moving up the ladder, I started having these women coming to me and they wanted to know, how was I doing that? And really that's what made me start to want to figure out, well, how can I help them? How can I help as many women as I can to do what I'm doing? And that's why they always say you never know who's watching you, because I had no idea that anybody was watching what I was doing. But when I found that out, it's like, how could I not share what knowledge I have or what information I have to help them to move forward too, and not maybe make some of the mistakes that I made, to be able to maneuver around their organizations to be able to get where they're trying to go. And I think that's what women have to realize too, is that there are women watching them as they're stepping up that ladder. And that's why you have to look back and help those that, that are even watching you as you move forward. You just have to do it. Wow.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's funny. I did a speaking engagement earlier this week, and I had never told this story before. And it's exactly that when I first made partner, for whatever reason, the firm did like an internal piece on me, like just 5 questions and 5 answers on our internal kind of, infrastructure, like the employee, website or whatever, the internal one. And it was a very short sort of Q&A, but I talked about, I think, imposter syndrome and confidence. And I talked about, just kind of doing it my own way and finding my voice. It was a little bit different in tone. I didn't give them the standard answers. And I got hundreds and hundreds of emails from women I did not know who said they'd never heard anyone just kind of, admit they were not sure how they were going to lead, or that they had, imposter syndrome. So I agree with you. I think, part of this is also sharing that most of us don't have it all figured out. We're figuring it out as we go and muddling through it in the same way. But I think there's sometimes a belief that, we have the secret sauce or we've completely figured it out. And part of what we need to also share is that it's hard and we're figuring it out as we go. And, the confidence comes in moments, right? And there's moments where I think I struggle just as much as the next person and the next woman next to me, but we don't often talk about that. So that's really important. I think I agree with that.
So what do you hope that your book will mean to women of color?
Yeah, really simply, I think as I was navigating, there were a lot of times where I felt alone, and I would question myself back to, questioning, do I need to do more? Is that me versus the structure? And I found that with almost universally the women I interviewed, again, they would think it was always them. Like, I need to do more. I didn't do enough. I didn't try hard enough. I did wrong on that report. And what I wanted women to realize is, one, they're not alone. And that they don't have to take responsibility for everything, and that they can change what they can change, but they can give back the rest. I don't think we tell women of color that enough. I think so many of the women of color I met have been taught to be grateful for even being at the table. And I want us to stop being grateful. Yes, you can have your moment of maybe gratefulness, but then I want you to be in full voice. It's not just getting to the table. If we don't get to the table and do it differently, I don't know that it's worth it in that sort of way. We need more. We need more change. We need more full voice. We need more space.
Yeah, speak up, be visible. And one of the things that I definitely advocate is that you do not let anyone else interrupt you or take your ideas. And that happens a lot too with women because they have that. I guess sometimes what I'm trying to say is sometimes we just get in our own way because of that, don't have that confidence. So when we're in that room, a lot of times, because we're maybe in the back of the room or on the side of the room, we don't speak up. We don't let our voice be heard. And you definitely have to do that, because if you don't speak up and get noticed, then who will know about your skills and your talents and your abilities? So you really have to just, like they say, when I hear people saying now, don't just try to get a seat at the table, but own the table or something to that effect. But I think what they're really saying is that when you walk into that room, you need to have that confidence that people know that you're in that room. So you're not just, lost in the background or fade out or anything like that. I think that's where they're going with that point when they say that. So if you had to, if you could encourage white leaders to read your book, what would you tell them expect to learn from it?
What's interesting? I wrote the book for women of color, and naively, this is my first book, right? I naively thought it's going to be women of color who pick it up. And initially, the first few weeks, that's not who picked it up. It was a lot of, and by the way, this even surprised me more, white male leaders who picked up the book. Executives, CEOs who picked up the book, who said, I know I need to do better. I know there's something broken. I know I want to help. But one, I don't feel comfortable asking. And two, I don't know where to go anymore. Right. And so that really surprised me, because it's not what I expected. What I want white leaders to realize is that the experience of women of color is very different, right? It's the stereotypes, it's the microaggressions, it's the overwork. It's the amount of extra. I have a whole chapter in the book where I call it the job in the job. There is a whole list of extra things that women of color get asked to do that I don't think people understand, and they're not rewarded for financially. It's not even acknowledged. You earlier talked about mentoring. I'll just use that example, to illustrate. When I interviewed white male leaders, they would say to me, I, mentor 12 people, let's say, like a dozen people. I would then interview white women leaders, and they would say, I mentor 24, right? So 2x that. Some of the women of color that I interviewed said that they mentor 100, 200, 300 women of color, because there's no one else in the organization to do that, right? And so it's just a small example of how it's different. And so I want white leaders to read the book, and they're reading the book and they're saying, I had no idea. Like, I knew something, but I don't understood the extent. And because there's so many stories in the book, not just, a dozen, there's literally, hundreds of stories in the book, or just like small vignettes. I think they can't dismiss, and it's not just one industry. So there is a universal experience for women of color happening at work that we can no longer deny. So that's what I want them to see and to realize. And then I want them to do something about it, but you can't do something about it until you understand it. And so that's what I'm hoping for.
Now, you have a phrase that I love. You don't have to see it to be it. Tell us what that means to you in your career.
Yeah, I think we often say you have to see it to be it. We tell people the opposite. And yes, so I want to increase representation. I think it's so helpful. I wish I had seen it, when I was growing up. But as someone who didn't see it, literally did not see myself anywhere, I literally wrote this mantra in email because I traveled again. So I didn't like paper. So I could keep an email. And when I was new, to the company, and I said, you don't have to see it to be it. And it was this idea that I could become a leader, even if I didn't necessarily see myself directly. And that became sort of my mantra for a really long time. And so I think, yes, representation matters, but for those of us that don't have it, like that doesn't mean we go sit on the sidelines. You have to find another way to do it. And so that's what it means to me. It was like my confidence mantra, I suppose,
Wow. It's very interesting. I mean, you're just sharing some great nuggets with us. I hope my viewers and listeners are taking notes. And just to mention again, the name of your book is The First, the Few, and the Only. And I am just very excited about the information that you're sharing with us. So tell us, what is the best way to respond in moments of microaggressions? And can you give us an example of one that you may have experienced?
And I love that you said before, like, I want women of color to stand up for their ideas, because it's the same sort of concept here. So what I found in my research is that most women of color, again, I already mentioned this, but they did not grow up talking about race extensively. Like, I think we, know it exists, but it was kind of a dismissed topic at home, like not huge conversations on what to do when you're confronted with it specifically, especially at work. And so you find you get into these situations and most people don't know how to respond. The women of color don't know how to respond. So let's say it's a microaggression or a racist comment. And I want to be clear, like, I tend to believe a lot of things we used to call microaggressions are racist, and we need to get comfortable saying they're the one and the same thing. But let's say it's a situation where someone has said something and it's not even maybe on their side meant to be malicious. They just don't even know what they said. Most women of color, what the research suggests, we end up feeling embarrassed. We end up feeling smaller. We end up feeling really uncomfortable. Let's say you're in a room, or physically in a room, and there's 6 people. One of the people in the room says something that is offensive to me. Usually we're the ones that get hot. We're the ones that feel uncomfortable. And what I tell women of color to do is I want you to practice, because I guarantee you are going to face a microaggressive, a stereotypical or racist incident in the next 6 months. When I say that, women usually stop me and say, no, in the next 6 days, right? Like, it's that frequent for a lot of us. And I say, I want you to practice what you're going to say, because for most of us, the same things come up in different form or fashion over and over again. So for me, I mentioned early on, it was my age, or people often ask me, like, how long have you been in this country? Or how did you learn how to speak English? When I was born here, right? And I know that's going to happen for the rest of my life. So what am I going to say when that comes up? I used to just, smile, or I used to just dismiss it. Now I've learned what to say. So I tell women of color, write out 3 things you can say. And then I also want you to practice saying it out loud, because there's a difference between just writing it out and actually practicing saying it when you're actually uncomfortable or feeling, angry. And I want you to say it out loud. And then in the next meeting, when someone says something, I want you to try one of those things, because I think there's more space now than ever to stand up for yourself, to use your confidence, to set your boundaries. But we haven't been taught how to do it or how to practice it. And I think some of this is practice, right. Is in how you respond in the moment. So that's really what I want people to realize. So let's say something is said. So, someone says to me, are you born in this country? Now I'll say, were you born in this country? Right. Or is English your first language? How did you learn how to speak English so well? How did you learn how to speak English so well? Right. I mean, I think there's different things you can say, and it doesn't have to be flip. It doesn't have to be angry. It can just be a very matter of fact boundary setting activity. But we've been taught to be grateful and nice. And I want us to get past being nice and being clear in what helps us.
Wow. So I know you mentioned earlier on when you were talking, and that you also left the company you were working with. When did you know it was time to leave your company, and how did that thought process unfold for you?
Yeah, so for me, I probably knew I needed to leave 3 years before I did. And so I share that because I think for some of us, it can be a challenging process. Again, I was deep in the grateful. I was deep in that it was a really significant job and I had financial security. But I knew I needed to leave for 3 years. And for me, it was two things. One, I think the current political climate had made me really feel like, am I doing my life's work? Like my background had actually been politics and policy. And so I had this growing question around, should I go back out of private sector and go back to policy or politics and what's happening to our world, which I think, many of the women of color I work with, I think are asking those questions. I then started to get really sick. And so it was that combination of two things that really forced me to kind of pick my head up and say, I can't do this anymore. So, and when I say really sick, I mean, I couldn't just be on the road in the ways that I was before with the job. And my challenge, though, I did not know it at the time, but I think because the reason I stayed is because I was a first, right? I felt very responsible to the women of color around me and coming up after me. And I don't think I knew. And doing those dinners that I mentioned, I think helped me realize and put words to the fact that I think I was staying a little bit out of obligation or responsibility and some out of fear, but I think a little bit out of that. So meeting all these women and putting voice to the fact that I'm staying might not be serving me, right? There's as much work I could do and influence outside of the company help me realize and help me, give me the confidence to leave. But it took me a long time. And I think we're now in a moment where a lot of women of color, it's funny, I just did a piece this morning. I did an interview and they suggested new data out there just even today is saying more women of color are leaving than even a year ago. So new data, we knew we were all leaving, but even more so. I think that sometimes we'd stay longer than we should in a lot of situations, whether it's relationships or companies or other places. And it's okay to pick your head up and think about leaving. It's okay to explore your options. It's okay to, maybe even interview. I have a story in the book where I worked with a senior partner when I was brand new to the company. And he said, I want you to interview every 3 or 4 years because it'll remind you of your worth in the marketplace. You don't have to leave. I'm not encouraging you to leave, but you'll know you have options. Right. And so I think a little bit of this is knowing that you have options and that you don't have to stay if a situation is not serving you or you're not growing. So.
That is, oh my goodness, that is key. Yes, indeed. I like that, that he would tell you to do that because as he said, you can see what your value and your worth is. And that's one of the things I think a lot of times women lose they don't understand what their value is or what their worth is to the organization. So that is definitely key. So if you had one piece of advice to leave to our viewers and our listeners, what would that advice be?
I think my advice would be we all have power. So much of the book is about power and themes around power. I think a lot of women and women of color have challenges around even the term power because it's usually, a negative feeling and, all that research is in the book. And I want us to realize that we have power. We may not feel like it in certain moments, but we have power in how we respond, how we show up, what we think about ourselves. And so I want us to remember that we're powerful. And then even moments where we don't feel it, we have power.
Wow. And my thing is that women are the greatest resource on this planet. That's the way I look at it, So when you talk about power, that's what I think about also too. Wow. So tell us how we can get your book. Also, let us know how we can reach out to you, your website, or your email address. If they wanted to reach out to you, if they wanted to get your book, how can my viewers and listeners do that?
Yeah, the book is everywhere. So again, the first, the few, the only. It is everywhere, wherever you buy your books. I want to encourage you to go to one particular place. And then my website, where we have information about the book, about speaking, and even about the company information. The website is Deepa Puru. So DeepaPuru.com, and all kinds of information there on the work that I'm doing and where I'm speaking.
Well, it has been a pleasure having you here. You shared some great success nuggets with us. I thank you. I know your schedule has been very busy, and if you have not watched her TED Talk, make sure that you go on YouTube and do that. It is also fantastic. As I was telling her earlier before we came on screen, that is what I said. I got to have her on the show because the information in your TED Talk was just phenomenal. So again, I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your success nuggets with us. You have been listening to the Success for Women show. We are here every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am Dr. Madeline Ann Lewis, your host. And if you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at info@exwsi.com or go to my website, which is www.exwsi.com. And while you're there, make sure you download my free 3-part video series on 3 things every woman should do to position herself for executive leadership. I'd like you to sign up. I'd like you to make sure that you share this episode. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel, and of course like the episode, but definitely make sure that you should share the episode so that everyone could get the benefit of the nuggets that we got today. And also don't forget too to sign up for my online course, which is Crack the Career Code: How to Lead with Confidence, Charisma, and Credibility. And if you want to sign up for the course, go to www.crackthecareercode.com. Again, you can reach out to me on any of the social media sites, email, or my website. And also, I want to make sure that I leave you with the announcement. We are going to be doing our monthly connections event, entrepreneurial connections event tomorrow, which is June 10th. And it's, as usual, it's from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. So if you want to come on and share what you do and what you might need and resources or what have you for your business, then just reach out to me. You have to register. So just email me again at info@exwsi.com. Again, I want to thank my guest for being here, Miss Deepa Purushothaman. Got it right that time. I also want to thank my viewers and my listeners. Again, we are here every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure that you join us. Make sure that you let others know that we are here. And as always, I'd like to leave you with this: be well and stay safe out there. Take care.